Hi, Hans. This is Emily. First of all, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your work today. Um, and I wanted to start off by clarifying a few things to explain how I commented, or I'm going to comment on your paper. So don't pay too much attention to the blue here. That's just for me to jog my memory of things to talk about. And then these comments here after each paragraph, you might want to take a look at those. I just briefly wrote my general understanding of what you were trying to comment on, or the main gist of each paragraph. And you can go ahead and look back at those and see if those are um, how you want to structure your essay, or if you want to do something different, and just sort of reflect on whether you made the best choices for this paper. And forgive the misspellings, I was typing quickly. Um, so before I explain how I'm going to comment on this paper, I want to just review the prompt, which I copy and pasted to the top of this document. And I take it that you did B. So I'm just going to read that out loud for us to establish before we go any further. Write an essay in which you take a position on the issue of free speech. To what degree are we entitled to say whatever we want? To what degree should there be censorship of what we can say? Does free speech even exist? Um, so in your paper, I feel like you definitely make an effort to answer some of these questions. However, I'm not sure that I feel like at the end of the paper you've really sort of come to a conclusion or a position that you stick to. So, this assignment is about coming to a conclusive claim at the end, or a single opinion. So let me just read this other part of the prompt that I think will help you as you revise. Opinion pieces such as these take positions and argue for a particular position using rhetorical appeals and persuasive language. And I'm not sure that you come to this to a definite orientation, to a definite position. It seems like what you're doing right now in your paper, sort of struggling to come to that, which is, that makes a lot of sense. This is a big issue, and there's a lot of things to sort of grapple with and think about, right? So I do not blame you for that at all. I just think it's good that you've sort of gotten through a lot of this thinking, and that you're going to be able to, as you revise, sort of really reflect on the conclusions that you've come to after writing this paper and exploring some of those issues. So I think I'm first going to try to go through your paper and talk about the bigger issues, the more global issues that are going to be the most important to you as you revise. And then I might try to go through one more time and talk about some more local issues that are a little more specific and a little less important, but they will definitely be important before you turn in a final draft. All right, so let's get started. So in your introduction, you definitely make an effort to introduce the topic, which is great. I was a little confused by some of the words that you have chosen to use in this essay. For example, the word segue. I think you could find a better word to use to describe this time of life. I wonder if, maybe in this period of your life, segue seems a little bit inappropriate here, and that is just a single word, but sometimes single words can significantly change the reader's perspective of what you're writing, and I think that this is something you should pay attention to as you're revising. Another thing that kind of jumped out at me was that you define free speech here, and I'm just wondering where you got that definition. Is it yours? it sounds a little bit formal, so I'm just kind of wondering if maybe you could let us know that maybe you're getting this from the Constitution or some other government source. And so I think I also just wanted to comment on, I really feel like these last couple sentences definitely outline some of the issues that you have in the paper, which is just really sort of coming to one conclusion about freedom of speech, right? So I'm going to read these out loud for us. As Americans, it's our patriotic right to be able to speak without restraints being implemented. But, in my opinion, the First Amendment shouldn't protect you if you're speaking in a hurtful or harsh manner aimed to hurt somebody either physically or emotionally. So I think it's great that you sort of set up two things that you think about freedom of speech which seem important. So, you're saying, Americans should be able to do that, but I like that you specifically define when they shouldn't have that right. So that's definitely answering one of the prompts questions, which is, trying to define when this should be allowed and when we should stop it. So another thing I wanted to bring up with you was the use a lot of quotations throughout this essay, and I personally found them pretty confusing. I kind of understand why you're using them. It's maybe because you feel like the term isn't yours or isn't quite defined, but I think that if that's a problem for you, you should define these terms for us, how you're going to be using them, and the quotations are really just kind of distracting. I think that your paper would be a lot clearer if you omitted them. So if, right here, free speech, raw, I think you can just go ahead and omit those throughout your paper. So let's move on to page 2. So I think that it's great that you get into a pretty specific description of something that your dad went through. However, this is when I started to wonder if maybe you were a little bit confused about what the issue of freedom of speech is, because it seems like most of your paper is addressing race. And I did appreciate that in the beginning. You sort of told us that you were going to argue that, freedom of speech is a good thing until you're trying to hurt somebody. I think it would be good to reestablish that point throughout your paper so that we're not confused while you're talking about these stories about race so much. I think connecting it back to freedom of speech more often would help it stay clear and on topic. And so I'm going to go ahead and talk about the way you integrated the interviews with people. So it's great that you did that, by the way. That was a specific part of the prompt, and I think it's good that you got those interviews with people. However, I feel like they're integrated sort of awkwardly right now. So your father, when he answered your question, to what degree of censorship should be implied in accordance to what we say? My father chose to answer by first asking me, if you're a lawful citizen, should you be allowed to say what you want? So he answered your question with another question. But then I got a little bit confused because it sounded like you were saying people should have freedom of speech, but then you kind of went back on that and said that that doesn't really exist, right? People who have good opinions that should be shared don't exist. So I was just a little confused right here. Seemed like you were kind of jumping around on the topic, which is why I think you should think about everything that you write about in terms of freedom of speech, because remember, that is the topic that you're writing about. So then you go on to talk about somebody else's perspective. I don't know if it's fair to call him more modern, because your dad is still, you know, living in the world today, and he probably experiences um, a lot of the same issues that this student did. But I do, I do understand the distinction. Um, so I was a little bit confused by Thomas's response to your question as well. So I'm going to go ahead and again read your question and then his response to you. So when asked if he'd ever encountered free speech on campus, he gave a different answer than expected. So I'm confused by the question. So you asked him if he ever encountered free speech. Um, I don't quite know what that means. And I personally would appreciate if you actually told us the exact question you asked us, because his response was even a little bit equally confusing, actually. So I'm going to read that aloud right now. Yes, I have a new experience with free speech every day. In the 3 years I've been here at DePaul University, I've seen and heard so much. I have seen a group of guys express racism through hiding it in casual conversation. It's always usually Caucasians who are the aggressors, trying to get over on the minority, since they, Caucasians, are the dominant group on campus. So I am kind of confused about this answer, because it seems to exemplify the confusion throughout your paper with, the discussion of freedom of speech and the discussion of racism. Because in your paper, I'm kind of getting the idea that you only see freedom of speech as a way to put minorities down, or a way to hate on people. And this answer to this question seems to only understand freedom of speech that way as well. So I was a little bit confused by that, and I'm just wondering about how you asked this question. Did you agree with this person that freedom of speech only means an excuse to hate on minorities? I'm not sure. So you close your paper by talking about the definition of free speech, which you kind of clarify were to understand your father's answers to that question, which was unbiased opinions, which I'm not sure that, or if, I'm sorry, freedom of speech exists, but your father seemed to think yes, but that it was only unbiased opinions. I was a little bit confused by this, and I would appreciate if you, instead of just telling us to refer to your father's definitions, if you told us what conclusions you came to. And then this last sentence is not a complete sentence. Those intentionally trying to convince others to succumb to the injustices that racism is. So that I would take it that this is an example of people abusing freedom of speech, which you seem to be arguing is what happens the majority of the time, which is an interesting point to make. So, my main suggestions for you as you go back and revise this are to really sort of come to a conclusion. I'm going to go ahead and scroll up to the top of the paper, and we're going to look at the prompt together again. I think you should reconsider your specific orientation on this issue, so that your essay is less sort of you grappling with the ideas, which is an important process, and sort of coming through with your opinions, your definite opinions, because that's what this is, right? This is an opinion piece that takes a position and argues for a particular position. All right, well, I hope that this is helpful to you, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks, Hans.